rebuttal period of 2 or up to 4 minutes. If the question is directed to both, each will have an opportunity to respond for 4 minutes. But because I'm moderator, I will go with a shorter amount of time in awaiting your questions and begin with ask for a 2-minute response from each of my questions. Are we ready?
All set. Thank you.
Okay. Again, Michigan is a particular state in this because we are a named party. We amended our Constitution in 2004 to Article 1, Section 25, defines marriage as a man versus a woman. So we have, on the one hand, this idea of Michiganders and voting this in and powerful states' rights. We are very ardently pro-state rights state. We've demonstrated that, and recently as recently as in the affirmative action issue here. However, the court has taken notice in the past, over the last particularly 50 years, of a consensus in states, and a consensus in states around particular issues. We now have 37 jurisdictions, if you include District of Columbia, that legalize same-sex. So we have a real balance here to strike between states' rights and the idea of federalism and the federal government preempting state rights in this case. How do you feel about the idea, and this is for both of you, and I'll ask you, Mr. Callan, since you're here right to my immediate left, how do you feel about the idea of Michigan foregoing its rights for the betterment of the consensus of the United States? I mean, giving up, because the court has to grapple with that issue. We've spoken to it. It's in our Constitution.
Thank you. That's a good question, and that's what I was referring to when I talked about who decides this issue. And the question becomes then, is this even an issue that should be decided on a national level, or should it be decided on a state level? Clearly, there are times, I mean, you can go back and look at we fought a civil war over states' rights, trying to enforce slavery, which was a horrible thing. So clearly, there are times when that is not going to be upheld. But in this situation, involving domestic relations, the family, and regulation of those things, the federal government has not been involved traditionally. In fact, our Supreme Court said in the case of Sosno versus Iowa in 1975, our Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court said, quote, "The regulation of domestic relations is an area that has long been regarded as virtually exclusive province of the states." That is something for the states to decide. So it's only if an issue rises, like in the Loving case, where it's racial discrimination, where it's something that's of such serious import, that the federal government will get involved. And we come back to the issue then again. Right now, there are 30 states that have Michigan's definition. We're one of the 30 states. So the voters in all those states, by large majorities, not close 51-49 votes. I mean, most of them were in the 60s, some in the 70s% that those were passed. So the will of the people is clear that this is the definition that they want to have in place. And so our position is that each state should determine its own standards. The federal court should not get involved in overturning the will of the people in an issue in an area that's dealing with an area of domestic relations and marriage that has traditionally always been left to the states.
Thank you,
Always.
Mr. Callan. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Schieber, would you like to reply?
Yeah, so I think that generally that holds true. But as Justice Kennedy has written, laws defining and regulating marriage, of course, must respect the constitutional rights of persons. But subject to those guarantees, regulation of domestic relations in this area has long been regulated to the various provinces and states. The state's interest in defining and regulating the marital relation is subject to constitutional guarantees. So if this is a constitutional issue, then there is that important caveat that is being glossed over here. You don't make people's fundamental rights suspect to a vote. Okay, this is perfectly appropriate matter for legislation here. So Yeah, it might be that. I mean, so in the Loving case, for example, at that time, if I'm correct about this, in the Loving case, at that time, most people were opposed to interracial marriage, but the courts thought it appropriate that actually the states, while they should be preserved their right to talk to kind of talk about marriage in a general way, it needs to be subject to constitutional concerns. And I think that the same is appropriate here. If marriage is a fundamental right if everyone has that right, then regardless of what the states say, they can make their own rules, but they have to be subject to those constitutional concerns. That's an important caveat.
Thank you, Mr. Schieber. Okay, we'll begin with the audience questions now. This question is directed to Mr. Kallman. When you speak of standards, from where or how do you think these standards come? Who decides?
Great question. That could be another couple hours. Look, go back to our Declaration of Independence. What did Thomas Jefferson say? All of us have certain unalienable rights. Okay? Now, those of you who've read the Declaration of Independence, where did Jefferson say those rights came from? Did they come from the government? No. They came from our Creator. There are certain rights we all have as human beings: the right to life, the right to pursue your interests, and as long as it's lawful and legal, things like that. We have certain unalienable rights, okay? So who decides those? Obviously, government is in place to protect those rights. You know, if you look at the Bill of Rights, it's almost a misnomer, really. I mean, the Bill of Rights are not granting any rights. The First Amendment says you have the right to freedom of religion, you have the right to assembly, the right to a free press, and all these things. Were they there? Did that First Amendment give the press the right to have a free press? No, it did not. Read the First Amendment. It says government can't pass any laws infringing upon the natural fundamental right of a free press to carry out their duties and do what they're doing, or the right of a person to exercise their religious beliefs. Okay? The whole Bill of Rights are not granting the rights. They are preventing the federal government from infringing on those rights. Huge difference. Okay? So where do those rights come from? They come from history and long, society over thousands of years. We've gotten to certain points and where we all have common sense and we have our human reason. It does come from, it's informed by individuals' religious beliefs, absolutely. And it's informed by folks who don't have religious beliefs. That's the whole point of our system, is to have everybody come together collectively. Everybody has the right to put out their opinion and viewpoint and see as a culture and society what we think is best. That's where it comes
Thank you,
from.
Mr. Kallman. In the interest of time and time management, we have a very healthy response to the question. So I will ask respectfully at some point around 2 minutes in the response so that we can get through all of these with the time constraints, okay? So I'll go for that. This question is for Justin. And the question is, do you believe there should be any limitations on marriage?
Yes. So quite obviously, if marriage is a contract, no one disagrees that contracts should have a particular age at which one can enter into. No one is arguing against basic consent laws here. So obviously, expanding the civil institution of marriage to include same-sex couples does not also entail all these doomsday scenarios where grown men are marrying children. Did we forget about just basic consent laws here? I mean, we're still talking about contracts, right? You can't enter into a contract until you're at least 18 here. So those kinds of doomsday scenarios are completely they're just false. They're just bad arguments. When it comes to polygamy, that was one thing that you brought up that I had forgotten to respond to. First of all, I see Personally, I see no moral problem with polygamy. I think that as long as you, again, have consenting adults working together and having a family, I don't see a problem with that. As long as there's no, some kind of poor power relationship between the various persons, right? Obviously, those kinds of power relationships can exist within any marriage. So again, barring the problems that can occur in relationships, I don't see any problem with that necessarily. But I don't think that my opponent has anything to really worry about here. The move from a two-person heterosexual the move from a legal framework that recognizes a two-person heterosexual marriage to the legal move to then a two-person relationship, civil marriage that recognizes both heterosexual and homosexual marriages. That's a very easy legal move to make, right? But now think about this, if you then add on additional persons, now you have 3-person, 4-person, 5-person marriages, right? The legal framework for that is going to be an incredibly difficult thing to bring about. It's not at all clear to me that the benefits that the state would gain by encouraging polygamous marriage in this way would be at all worth the kind of legal nightmare that would kind of unfold against that kind of backdrop. So it seems to me like that's just not even a plausible worry.
Respectfully, thank you very much, Mr. Schieber. Thank you. The next question is addressed to both of you, and it is, why do you think a heterosexual marriage benefits society more than a homosexual marriage? For the old Christian dude. Oh. I apologize for that. I thought that was part of the question. So I guess we have to figure this one out.
That's the old Christian dude. Again, I think the 3 points I brought out earlier, that it does benefit society, and that part of this too is using common sense and common understanding and looking at societies and cultures over time, and back in Greece and Rome and when they fell and some of the things that they started doing along the same lines, and their societies crumbled. All right, you have to have a solid foundation at the family level, or a society will not make it. It's that simple. And when you expand this out, and as Justin indicates, he doesn't think that will really happen. Look, go to the national gay websites and stuff. They're all in favor of multiple parent or multiple partner unions and marriage and things like that. As I mentioned, Gloria Steinem and others also. They support NAMBLA, who wants relations between older men and younger boys. They want the age of consent lowered. All of these things start flowing from changing our understanding culturally of what marriage is. And when you start down that road, it doesn't end with this, folks, not by a long shot. And you're going to end up with a lot more people in all kinds of different relationships, all being called marriage, and watch what that does to our society.
Thank you, Mr. Kallman.
Am I able to respond to that? Forget how the format is. Okay. So if you could give me the name of a major organization, an LGBT organization that supports NAMBLA or supports lowering the consent laws.
If you go to, I don't have it off the top of my head, but if you go to that Harvard Journal of Law article that I mentioned, volume 34, it's 2011, they cite the ones in there. It's all cited there.
Okay. So, obviously, as I said already before, you're going to have crazy fringe groups on every side. Unless this is some kind of mainstream thing, I don't know why we're appealing to these crazy fringe groups to, fear that this is some plausible doomsday scenario. This is just a bad argument, people. Next question.
Thank you, Mr. Schieber. This question is addressed to both participants, and it is, why not design a contract, put a new word for your contract in the law book and move on? I suppose it just as a basic contract as an alternative to any sort of marriage. Why not revert to that?
Yeah, I think I'm maybe I didn't make that clear in my comments. I think there are ways to legally protect individuals entering into other types of relationships and that are not marriage. and still have legal protection. So I definitely think that would be something that could be done.
Mr. Schieber? Yeah, separate but equal was ruled as unconstitutional a while ago.
Okay, very good, very good. All right. Moving on then, again, to both participants. Whose idea was marriage? What is the origin of it? And I would ask Mr. Kallman to go first, please. And then Schieber.
I don't know if I can go back and cite, any of us could go back and cite chapter and verse who's the first married couple. I don't think there's any historical records that would support that sort of thing. Again, I think as I argued early on in my first opening comments, this is something that over the course of human existence and human relationships has something that has developed over time and has been in place for thousands of years. And so, to go back and cite chapter and verse where it started, I think that would be pretty tough to do. But you can go back and look at past cultures, and some form of a marriage relationship was in place.
I think that the actual historical question there is absolutely an interesting question. I wouldn't even know how to really go that far back to find out. But it seems like a pretty intuitive view that, joining people, supporting people, having a public declaration of two persons' commitment to each other, and so then you have their society kind of reinforcing that, holding those persons to that commitment. I think that's quite obviously a good thing, and it seems to me like the genders of the individuals involved are completely irrelevant. I feel like marriage is something more than the procreative potential of genital variety.
Very good, thank you. All right, moving on. The next question, again, addressed to both, and since you're standing, Mr. Schieber, I will invite you to respond first. The question is, couldn't same-sex marriage lead to strengthening of marriage as an institution?
I think it already has. I think that when you look around and you ask the question, who are those persons that are getting excited about the institution of marriage? Who are those persons that don't take it for granted, but see it as a goal, see it as the ideal? And I think quite clearly the answer to that question is the LGBT community. It's those persons that have got people talking about commitment, that have got people talking about family structures, and that have rightfully put that conversation in the focus that I think it deserves to be in.
Thank you. Mr. Kallman?
Can you read the question again?
Yes.
Sorry.
I'll find it here. No trouble at all. It was, pardon me, I have it here. Couldn't same-sex marriage lead to the strengthening of marriage as an institution?
Well, again, as I would just be repeating the same arguments I've already made earlier. Marriage as an institution is one man and one woman, and it has been that way as I've discussed here. So I don't see where this road of changing the definition of what is a marriage, and it is a redefining of the term, strengthens marriage at all. It dilutes it. And as I said, it makes it essentially meaningless, because at some point it is not going to end with just same-sex couples. It will not end there, folks. It's very clear that is not going to happen. So you're going to end up with all different kinds of relationships, and some that I think would be shocking to people sitting here today. That 5 or 10 years from now, wait till you see what the courts do with that. And so it will make essentially marriage as a defined term meaningless, because any grouping of people could be construed to be marriage. It defines it out of existence.
Okay, thank you.
I think that this notion that when you bring in a new population of persons into the institution of marriage, that therefore it becomes meaningless, I think that ignores the fact that there are good reasons to preventing it from going any further. Again, with the polygamy thing, right, I don't think that there's a moral problem there, but if we're talking about the civil institution, there's quite obviously some huge legal hurdles that would have to be overcome. When it comes to man-child relationships, obviously no one is debating consent laws here. So again, this slippery slope argument is just an invalid argument. And this notion that marriage becomes meaningless to me is just wild. John Corvino, professor of philosophy at Wayne State University, writes, when there's someone whose job it is to take care of someone else, that's good for the two of them. But it's also good for their neighbors. Married people are on average less likely to burden the public purse. The things that make them healthier and happier at home also make them more productive members of society. It's a win-win, good for the married couple and good for those around them. From a social policy point of view, we should aim to promote this sort of thing for as many members of society as possible, straight and gay alike. It seems to me that calling something like that meaningless is not only a rejection of marriage as any kind of meaningful thing, it seems to me to undermine the value of heterosexual marriages.
Thank you, Mr. Schieber. All right, this next question again is for both of the participants, and I'll ask Mr. Kallman to begin. It's a lengthy one, and I'm making me feel better about my own penmanship. You mentioned that voting equals the validity of what society wants as a whole. Therefore, it equals the validity of what is best for society. Couldn't you compare this to voting for the president? Example, voted for a president, therefore, customarily means that the president is the best option to run the country. So the question involves the validity of voting and how we carry it.
Sure. I'm not saying voting is in and of itself always the best way to go. I agree with Justin when he said earlier about if there are constitutional concerns and issues, even if the vast majority of people voted for something, if it's unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional. But that's not what you're dealing with here. You're not dealing with, this discussion, and you keep hearing the phrase, there's a fundamental right to marry. There's a right, some kind of legal right to marry. No, there isn't. Not under our laws, not under our system. There is no fundamental right at all. And so that's my point, is that legally this is something different, and part of it goes back to the long history and everything else of marriage. But back to the question about voting, look, we're human beings. All of us have our frailties. And whenever any human beings are involved in something, it's never going to be totally right. We all have our foibles, and things aren't necessarily going to be the best. But our system of a Republican form of government, and I don't mean Republican in party, we have a republic, and it's involved with voting and the right of the people to express their will. And as long as it's done correctly, and in this case it has been done correctly, not in violation of the Constitution, that is what should control, because that is the system that we have that has proven to be the best that's been developed so far, I think, in human history. Much better than having a king dictated to us, or having some czar or communist dictator or something like that dictating it to us. It's much better to have we the people doing it. That's what our system is set up on. So if I have to choose between all not necessarily the best options, I'll choose the people any day of the week.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kallman. Mr. Schieber?
Part of me worries that this appeal to the voting that took place about these same-sex bans, part of me feels that the appeal to these things is, I don't want to say disingenuous, but I guess I don't have another word. Because it seems quite obvious to me that even if we did a vote and it went the other way, that Mr. Kallman would still be against the legal right to marry for homosexuals. Is that?
No, if the people voted it in, they voted it in. Then obviously I could still oppose it as a religious, again, an ideal situation, which I would. But if the people voted it in, it's voted in. And then the people have to live with the consequences of it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Schieber, this is directed to you, this is asked of you.
Yes.
In many areas outside of same-sex marriage, it is nearly universally recognized that a stable heterosexual marriage provides for the best nurturing environment for children. Statistics recognize success in school, drug use, imprisonment, etc. show this clearly. Why would this be different in terms of same-sex marriage? Do you believe that A, a mother brings nothing unique to a family, and B, a father brings nothing unique to a family?
I wasn't entirely sure what the question. They're asking generally why.
I believe the question is asking, because of the same-sex issue eroding the idea of strictly heterosexual, the questions are, does a mother bring nothing unique, or does a father bring nothing unique? Because the statistics show that heterosexual couples, children from those environments end up better off.
Yeah, so there's a whole swath of things to address there. First of all, I want to repeat two main points. First of all, whoever wrote that, with all due respect, you're just absolutely wrong when it comes to the actual social science. As Mr. Kallman argued, yeah, it seems intuitive, right? But of course, intuition is no substitute for hard data, okay? So for the first point, it's just wrong. Secondly, it's irrelevant. Again, we don't deny people rights because they're not the ideal, right? The people who have the most difficult time raising children are, because of obvious lack of resources, single mothers, right? Single parents. Their children are disadvantaged. We don't say, oh, we're not going to give you your parental rights because of, you're not the ideal situation for raising children. Thirdly, there are already homosexuals raising children. That's not going to stop if we don't legalize their marriage. So guess what? The way we can encourage those children, the way we can secure those children, is by recognizing legally their parents' marriage, and therefore stabilizing their society. What happens if one parent dies? The legal parent dies, and the non-legal parent is left with the child. That non-legal parent has to jump through a whole list of legal loopholes, while that child sits in legal limbo without a parent, because guess what? We didn't want to recognize their marriage. This is harmful to children. This does not benefit children. It's harmful to children. There's 5,300 roughly children being raised by same-sex couples in Michigan right now, and they are not benefiting from this ban. And they would benefit if we were to just allow their parents to be married.
I can respond briefly to that. That situation is the same for step-parents. If you're a step-parent and you've raised a child for 10 years, and then the mother passes away and you're the father as a stepfather, you have no legal rights and you have to jump through the hoops. As I said earlier, there are ways to deal with those problems and to pass laws and do that sort of thing. And I respectfully disagree with Justin, and I think the premise of the question is exactly right, because there are social science studies out there. Again, read that Harvard Law Journal article, because they cite to them, which say the very things that were the premise of that question, that children do better in school, they do better later on in life, and et cetera, if they come from a family that had a mother and a father. Now, obviously, we live in a broken world. There are going to be times when one parent dies and is not there. There are going to be single parent situations. Those are the folks who we should help, and we do help as a society and culture. And we do provide assistance to them to try to get through those things. Again, those arguments, and I think I kind of agree with Justin at this point, are maybe kind of tangential to the argument of the same-sex issue and whether or not they should be allowed to marry or not. And again, how I know we disagree on this. We're doing it agreeably, so I appreciate that. But I think it will be expanded further. Just that. Thank you.
Thank you. This question is addressed to both participants. And Mr. Schieber, I would invite you to go first, to respond first, please. If animals don't have the ability to make choices to sin or have free will, how can you explain why almost all animal species have same-sex relationships?
I'm not sure that question was addressed to me.
I
don't deny that animals, that there are quite clearly homosexual behavior among the animal kingdom. I mean, we're animals too. Surprise. What I would like to quick note, I'm breaking the rules here, but I do want to quick note the structure of a inductively correct argument from authority requires that both you are referring to a person who is within the relevant field, an expert in the relevant field, and secondly, that the position that they're taking is the position of the consensus of that field. And so again, we can cite fringe studies, right? But that does nothing to undermine the inductively correct argument from authority, and to use a particular study or a small handful of studies to try and argue that there is a significant difference between children raised by same-sex couples and heterosexual couples is just an inductively invalid argument.
Well, and I would argue that that's ridiculous. There's no consensus at this point.
Logic is what it is.
Well, no, I can argue it's logic that those who come down on our side of this and all the reports and studies that have been done that go our way. So my point is that this is still fluid and there are no final conclusions one way or the other. And what we're doing is we're throwing out a system here that's been in place, as I said, for a long time, based on inconclusive data at this point. As to the issue of animals, I never studied that. I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming there probably is, but I've never heard of it being widespread in the animal kingdom.
I mean, this is a.
I mean, that's kind of a.
Right. This is just. When people say that homosexuality is not natural, right? That's just not true when we look at non-human animal kingdom.
Very good, thank you. This one, I am guessing, is directed at Mr. Kallman. Jesus never speaks upon same-sex marriage, so why should some Christians speak about it?
Well, he most certainly did. Read Mark 10, chapter 10. He said marriage is one man and one woman leaving their parents and joining together as one flesh. So you're just wrong. Read the Bible. He clearly said that that was a marriage.
Okay. I'm trying to determine who this one is for. So I guess this is posed to both participants. There's a separation of church and state. If you argue that legalizing gay marriages forces Christians to accept gay people, can't the argument also be made that by not allowing gay marriage, you are forcing society to follow those religious views? Evidently. Well, again, Mr. Kallman.
Again, I don't agree that, well, let me answer it this way. In society right now, we have folks on both sides of this issue. And as I said before, this is going to be regulated. There are going to be laws put in place somehow, in some manner. I prefer through the ballot box, through the voter. Justin, I think, prefers through the courts. Okay? But that involves a moral decision. I don't see how you can say it's not a moral decision either way. I mean, both ways, it's a moral decision. So I guess I don't see the difference. I mean, the question is not, are we legislating morality? The question is going to be whose morality is being legislated. And I don't mean in that at all. Again, I've said this before. I don't think anybody, we are all God's creatures. We are all deserving of respect. And we are all deserving of being treated properly and all of that. So I don't think, that question presumes the opposite. And I can tell you the religious circles I run in and everything, I don't run into people who hate gay people and all that kind of, I mean, that's just not true. There are gay folks at our church. I mean, so I've had gay clients. I think the premise of the question is making an assumption that's just not true, that there's some kind of hate or ill will towards the gay community. That's just not true.
Thank you.
So I think that Kallman's right in that his argument was not predicated upon religious premises. So in my opening statement, if you recall, I think that the religious morality argument is quite clearly false, because for the same reason that people like Kallman and others like him are bold defenders of the free exercise clause of the First Amendment, the freedom to exercise your religion according to its moral doctrine, and yet that law entails the right of other persons to worship other gods, which under Christianity is quite clearly immoral. So, so that's, that argument.
Yeah, but I would never say to the Buddhist or to the Muslim or anybody else, you can't worship that way, and I would fight to the death their right to worship that way.
Exactly.
So the free exercise clause applies to everybody equally.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm saying, I think we're saying the same thing, really. We
Yeah,
really
I'm
are,
saying
yeah.
If you
It's
were
just-
making the religious argument, it
Yeah.
would be wrong because it would be inconsistent for you to do so.
Okay, thank you. This one is, again, addressed to both participants, and we'll start here with Mr. Schieber is at the podium. So we'll begin there, please. And here is the question. Is it harder for the LGBT community to be a protected class versus being black because they don't wear their diversity? Black people look black, LGBT people don't look LGBT.
I am not a member of either of those groups, and so I don't feel like I can really speak to that. When it comes to the protected class issue, though, I did want to make a brief comment. I called them a suspect class, and Kallman is right. I was incorrect about that. They are a quasi-suspect class, and this was decided in 1976 in Craig v. Boren by the Supreme Court. And a quasi-suspect class, in the context of equal protection analysis, if a classification such as gender, or in a classification such as gender or legitimacy, then courts must apply intermediate scrutiny and ask whether the statute is substantively related to an important governmental interest, and I don't think that's been demonstrated tonight.
Or is there a rational basis? It's a lower level scrutiny by the courts, exactly right.
All right. Okay, moving on. If your only worry is that redefining marriage will allow anyone to get married, including groups of people, then can't the new definition limit marriage to two people? So can't we simply just...
On what basis? No, I would say that legally, in the way these court decisions are written, there's absolutely no basis to limit it to just two people. There's just not, because polygamy proves my point, and there's already been lawsuits, I think, that are in play right now. I don't know that there's been any final decisions where polygamists are trying to assert the same sorts of rights under the same theories as same-sex couples. I just think there's no question that it will not be limited to two, and if a law was passed to limit it to two, I don't think it would be upheld by the courts.
Can I ask a question to Kallman? Okay, so let's say that this did happen. Let's say that polygamy did become, using the same arguments generally, it did become legal to enter into to polygamous marriage. And I guess what I'm asking is, could you give me a moral argument against that doesn't appeal to things that are also problems within heterosexual marriages?
Well, a moral argument would be based on my religious beliefs, okay?
Sure,
Which
sure.
come back to,
But one
Christ said the
available
standard
for
is
all
one
people
man and one
always.
woman, and that's what marriage is. And so, anything outside of that, and again, we're focusing here tonight on same-sex marriage. I would feel the same way about a man and a woman, living together outside of marriage.
Yeah.
Under my religious faith, that's as inappropriate.
Do you have-
So
do you have
this
a
is
legal
not,
argument you could use?
so to say that there's some legal argument, again, my point is that there isn't a legal argument to stop the polygamist if this gets put into law. That's my point.
Right. So again, I'm not sure my question was answered. What I'm saying is that let's assume that this is correct. Let's assume that the law goes forward in this way, right? That now polygamous marriages are fine, right? Now, obviously, you can't appeal to your religious views as a problem for this kind of legislation. So I'm asking you, what kind of other argument you could appeal to that would be available to all persons of all faiths and of non-faiths?
Sure. Well, the same arguments I've made tonight about what the 3 points about why traditional marriage is important and the reasons therefore, and I don't want to just repeat everything I said earlier, I would make the same argument that in a polygamous marriage, you're going to have the same sorts of problems.
Because now those children have even more resources to
Well,
grow.
or more
Right.
problems.
Because that's a problem.
Or more
When you have
problems.
more parents to raise you and more parents making
Well,
income.
that's, I think, a discussion
Well-
for another time.
Well, thank you. That was very scintillating. Let's get back. Here's a question about traditional marriage, or argument that involves the issue at hand. Have traditional marriages included tax incentive survivor rights? Traditionally, women didn't count as survivors. That's question one, have traditional marriages included incentives and survivor rights? I'm guessing that these are the rights that are they in question? The person wants to know whether these would extend in same-sex marriage. And should same-sex couples continue to be disallowed the same civil marriage rights as the opposite sex couples? So again, we're getting to tax incentives and specific rights that come, rights and responsibilities that follow with the civil union. And in this case, the mention of survivor rights, but there are others that you're free to bring up as well. Some of the rights and responsibilities of the civil
Sure, I
marriage.
mean, married couples get benefits under the tax code when you file your income tax returns every year. You get more money back filing jointly than you do singly as a person. And if you're married and you file separately, you get less money back. There are built-in codification in the estate laws, a lot of times to protect women, dower rights and things like that. So, those things are in place. And that's what I was talking about earlier. I think those kinds of things can be handled legally without changing the definition of marriage and without essentially destroying marriage as an institution in our country. You can pass laws and allow for different ways to handle those things. And that's not unequal treatment. That's equal treatment because it's allowing them the same protections in the law.
So, if I'm hearing correctly, presumably Mr. Kallman would be fine if we created a new institution called schmarriage, which was identical in every way to marriage, but just was a different word.
No.
That's
Well,
exactly what I'm reading.
I'm not going to respond to that. That's silly.
Okay, we're nearly out of some. There are redundant questions here. All right, let's see. This one I believe both could address this one, respond to this, at least elaborate on it. If love is faithful and kind, and I'm supposed to love my neighbor, why can't I kindly allow my gay neighbors to wed? Now, I realize that this is likely more directed to Mr. Kallman.
Sure, that's a religious, quote from the Bible. Sure, love your neighbor and all that. Look, and I'm assuming again now you're asking me this as a religious question, not as a legal question. What we've been talking about here tonight. But the old adage is that, well, think about it like this: if you're a parent and your son or daughter goes out and starts committing bank robberies, or doing drugs, or doing other criminal activity, or anything that's illegal, or improper, or sinful, if you want to call it that, doesn't have to be criminal, just something that you think is harmful to them, does the parent show love by simply saying, okay, you just keep going right on going the way you want to go? No, you show love by expressing your concern and trying to help that child to get through it and to stop acting in a particular way. So it comes down to how you define, love, I suppose, at that point. But we're starting to get into a topic now we're not here tonight to talk about, at least I didn't think so, about whether, immorality or morality of gay lifestyle or anything like that. That again would be a whole other topic for another evening.
Very good, thank you. This will be the final question. As I said, the others, there are many redundancies here. The question begins, court involvement. Isn't the responsibility of a republic to protect the rights of the minority? Majority rule, but not at the expense of minority citizens. If not, can LGBT stop paying taxes?
Well, go ahead and try to stop paying taxes. I'll leave you my card because you're going to be a lawyer. But I think read the first part of that question again. I'm sorry.
Isn't it the responsibility of a republic to protect the rights of a minority?
Oh, that's right. Minority versus majority. Of course, and that's part of what we have built into our system. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that in a republic you have to let the minority rule over the majority. It's always a balancing. And that's the whole process of the give and take, and why we have discussions, and why we have meetings like this, and why you go to the legislature and you send representatives to debate these things and to come up with laws that they think are a good compromise of everybody's competing interests. And so my answer to that would be yes to both. The majority, for the most part, should rule, you know, and that's the way our system is set up. But if there are times where a minority is being oppressed by a majority and it's unconstitutional, as Justin had talked about before, and things like that, that's what we have our system in place for, is to protect the minority in those situations. Thank you.
And I just want to express a thank you to all of you coming out and to the people who invited me to come out and have this discussion.
Yeah, thanks. And Justin, it's been great. It's been a real good discussion tonight.
Well,
Thanks.
We have allowed time for closing remarks.
I don't think I have anything else. Yeah.
Okay, all right, well, thank you both.